Hello and welcome to the second program in the series Trees, the Silent Sentinels. I'm Sherwood McCaskie. As always, I'm glad that you have opted to spend the next 30 minutes with my guest. In last week's program, we introduced the series by looking at the early history of trees, the Amerindians' association with trees, and the Europeans' deforestation of the island. This week, we will begin with historian Trevor Marshall. He continues his look at the different types of trees found here in Barbados and further afield. This program will also bring into focus the stately mahogany tree.
On the face of the island, there were a number of trees. We've identified a lot of them. Mastic, fustic. There's Fustic Village in St. Lucie. And there's cedar, of course, and other trees, manchineel, cochineal, poison tree, name them.
Now, in response to historian Trevor Marshall's suggestion, if you were to name them, the many trees that were found in Barbados, one that readily comes to mind and is often thought of as indigenous, and from which we make many decorative pieces for our homes and offices, is the mahogany tree.
Don't think of the mahogany. Do not include the mahogany among Barbados's list of original trees. The mahogany is a South American product, original, and this was brought into Barbados when the Sugar Revolution took hold of the land space in this island.
Up and down the islands of the Eastern Caribbean, we take mahogany as one of the natural trees that have been growing on our islands forever. But this was not so. It is only in the colonial period that mahogany came from the Greater Antilles and from Central America to be planted in these islands. One of the reasons was that although it was sited back in the colonial period, the Spanish colonial period, in islands like Hispaniola and Puerto Rico and Cuba, and lots of it was cut down to go and be taken in the early years to Spain to decorate and be used for the palaces of the Spanish kings. What we find is that they were basically focused on the Greater Antilles. One of the reasons was that seeds of the mahogany could not float against the current that was coming up from the south, so that those trees that were common to the Greater Antilles, basically they remained in those islands. And then later what we find is that during the colonial period, the plants of mahogany were then brought down to the islands and planted here. However, the mahogany is one of the most prized furniture woods in the islands. And that was one of the main reasons why it was brought down and planted. Planted for two reasons: because it had the benefit of providing wood. Of course, it had to be at least 60 years before you could reap a mahogany and get a good size of board or post to be able to make your furniture. So it was a long-term investment.
Mahogany was introduced into Barbados in 1763, and there are places in Barbados that you can go now and you can see mahogany trees that were there before you were born, before your mother was born, and before your mother's mother was born.
Reverend Griffith Hughes, a naturalist, and who wrote a natural history of Barbados in the 1700s, he distinctly identified mahogany as one of the trees brought into the island in that period of the early 1700s in order to provide, yes, a boost for the island in terms of, preventing erosion, but also providing a hardwood for the sugar industry and for the plantations. Mahogany is an excellent wood, as you know, for furniture and plantation furniture in Barbados for the last 200 or 300 years has been primarily made of mahogany.
So essentially what we have is mahogany as a very valuable plantation crop, if you wish, for the making of furniture. And West Indian furniture and all of the skills that came with it to make it, all the craftsmen of the islands, both during the period of slavery and afterwards, produces this remarkable furniture. Beautiful.
Mahogany is something that is important in Barbados. Everyone knows that, you know, they have a granny, or they themselves have a settee, or they have a Morris chair, or they have a lamp or something that is made out of mahogany. And all of those items would have been made out of mahogany trees.
You have the wonderful workmanship and carving in the backs of chairs and sofas and all associated with this mahogany.
But by then, cedar had gone, the locust had gone, the mastic had gone, the fustic had gone, and these are hardy perennials like mahogany. But when we speak of the mahogany, we're looking at hardy perennials. Hardy means strong, sturdy, it can't be consumed except by fire, have to get several chops of an axe or chainsaw to cut them down. Perennials mean that they go on and on and on.
So what we call the Barbados mahogany with its small leaves is essentially also in other Caribbean islands called the West Indian mahogany, because it was common to the greater islands of the West Indies, the Greater Antilles. Whereas the broad-leafed mahogany is also called the Honduran mahogany, because that was in South America.
Not only do we exhibit our beautiful mahogany furniture in our homes and offices, doing so proudly of course, our love of this tree is so enshrined in the Barbadian psyche that it has led many of us to escort our visiting relatives, colleagues, or friends to a spot on the island that is canopied by the majestic mahogany tree.
When you get family come to Barbados, everybody likes to take them to a nice viewpoint, and we know a very popular viewpoint is the Cherry Tree Hill. And you can look from Cherry Tree Hill over the East Coast, but when you look back from Cherry Tree Hill, there's a beautiful row of mahogany trees that creates a beautiful tunnel. And those trees were there before 1848, when one of the first histories of Barbados was written. So those trees are very, very old. And if we are using mahogany and we want to have all of those beautiful items, then we have to think, if we cut down trees now, are we replacing those trees that we are cutting down?
Now, on the summit of Cherry Hill, as it was known back then in earlier days, our plant pathologist and author Dr. Claire Durant reads from what is on record as one of the island's earliest written histories, where this stately grove of mahogany trees is mentioned.
So we have here The History of Barbados by Robert H. Schomburg, and this book is from 1848. It is a geographical and statistical description of the island Barbados. And in this book, on page 238, he states that an avenue of mahogany trees leads from the mansion to Cherry Hill. The mansion meaning the St. Nicholas Abbey, the summit of which represents one of the finest prospects in the island.
The point being made here is that forward-thinking individuals who went before us recognize the importance of having these trees on the landscape of Barbados. It now begs the question, a question which was posed earlier: what are we planting today? From the summit of Cherry Tree Hill, we travel to the capital city and visit the site where a recently fallen mahogany tree took root hundreds of years ago, and during its lifetime it has witnessed many an individual rising and setting.
And some months ago, we had a kind of naturalist catastrophe in that one of the oldest trees in the island, a tree in St. Mary's Church in Bridgetown, fell without warning. That's the end of that. It destroyed the Barclays tomb, etc. And some persons claim that it's the oldest mahogany tree in the island. Now that would put it at about 1800, 1825. And we're suggesting that the mahogany was here at least 125 years earlier.
And that tree was 300 years old. It was a massive tree. And that tree would have been there for generations. And yes, it fell after all this time and it damaged, you know, parts of the areas there. But for all of the time it was there, it was lovely. People enjoyed it. It provided shade. It shaded the churchyard and the areas on the outside. We should take the opportunity to replace a tree there and look after it to make sure that then that new tree, that new mahogany tree, can also grow to be 300 years old and people can enjoy it for generations to come.
Very good idea, Dr. Durant. We certainly hope that the church will take up your suggestion and replant a mahogany tree on the spot. Meanwhile, historian Trevor Marshall speaks about what can be done with a fallen mahogany tree, the utility of it, that is.
What we do know, as I said earlier, is that the mahogany has been utilized by plantations initially for building, but they found that the mahogany was not good for putting nails in, etc. It is almost impenetrable. But so mahogany has been utilized for decorative purposes, for making chairs and other furniture, Morris chairs, cane bottom chairs, armchairs, deck chairs, also bedroom furniture, beds with the canopies, four-poster beds, towel stands, book stands, etc. All of these in Barbados have been made of mahogany. And indeed, it was a symbol of your status in society in times gone by if you had or did not have mahogany furniture. And we have exported mahogany in all forms, furniture and now furnishings and decoratives. It is a king among hardwoods. It is evident. It is obvious. It is prominent. And every plantation had a mahogany tree. But more to the point, the mahogany has been utilized in helping to keep erosion down to a minimum.
But when you planted mahogany, you were also protecting the land, you were encouraging the rain, and also adding nutrients to the soil as the leaves fell and rotted and the rain carried it to neighboring fields.
Mahogany has been utilized and it is spread all over the island. People grow mahogany trees. You know, they take about 25 years to come to full maturity, and then they grow ad infinitum. They'll be here when our grandchildren have grandchildren, and that is how the mahogany continues to define our landscape. Right? So the mahogany, it took a beating within the last 30 years in terms of being utilized for furniture, because we then went to upholstered furniture, leather, leatherette, fabric, etc. And the mahogany continues. Like Old Man River, it just keeps growing along, not rolling along, right? So that sums up, but does not exhaust, the mahogany, because the mahogany will be here as long as Barbados is here, and it will be our premier tree, bar none.
We speak of the pride and the place of the mahogany furniture in our homes and in our offices, and of course the grandeur of the tree. In fact, we have always had a special love affair with the mahogany tree here in Barbados. It was a common sight to walk or drive around the island and see a boulevard of mahogany trees. Many of you would recall what a pleasurable experience it was to walk along the Maxwell Road of Highway 7 here in Christchurch.
As a boy, I grew up in Maxwell Coast Road, near to the sea, but we didn't have any hotels around us at that time, and we had many old residences with lots of trees. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, many of the residences were torn down to build various hotels and apartments in the region. And with the tearing down of the residences, many trees were lost. Many years ago, I don't remember how many, but I was still in my probably late teens, they decided to do some road improvements. And many of the beautiful mahogany trees that actually lined that road were either taken out or severely hacked back.
One of my neologisms is the concretization of Christchurch. And this was really dramatically demonstrated when they decided to build a sidewalk on the Maxwell Road. And someone called the National Trust. We were actually at a management meeting at the National Trust one morning when we got a call saying, have you seen what the Public Works have done at Maxwell's? They're cutting down all the mahogany trees. And there was this fantastic row of mahogany trees on the northeast side of Maxwell Road, going all the way from down below Mrs. Bruce's shop, all the way up to Deal Corner. I don't know how many there were dozens of them. And by the time we were alerted to it, they had taken down 3/4 of them. We called the Prime Minister's office because the Prime Minister is responsible for planning, and he immediately put a stop to it. But nothing could be done. We had lost that fantastic row of mahogany trees that gave shade to people walking all up and down that road. And then we had the scandalous effrontery of the developer calling the place Mahogany Court when all of the trees have been cut down. And it's hard to find a mahogany tree in that area of that little residential suburb.
When those beautiful mahogany trees were killed, it was as if a lovely shaded canopy had been removed from this area here in Barbados. Remember, it takes about 25 years before a mahogany tree reaches maturity.
Last year, I remember a beautiful large mahogany tree that we had in Maxwell Coast. I remember it from the time I was a little boy in almost diapers as we ran around Maxwell Coast. It had reached a girth that at least 2 of us would need to join hands, probably 3 of us, to surround the tree. And I was horrified last year to see it being chopped to bits. By the time I got to Maxwell Coast to visit my mom, they had already cut all the top off and the debris was all over the place. And I asked, well, what's being built there? I subsequently found out it was a car park. I thought they were going to build a new building. This was a horrifying destruction of a beautiful tree. That tree must have been at least 100 years old. And, you know, they brought in an excavator, a sizable excavator, and hacked away at the roots. They never got it out. So this rather ugly stump remains now in a part of their car park. How much nicer it would have been if they had incorporated the tree by proper trimming and pruning into their car park, providing shade for the cars that would park there. But no, it was hacked to bits. It's making a valid or struggle to send out new shoots, but it will never be beautiful again. And I think more likely it will die, because once you start to tear the roots of trees apart, you introduce all kinds of bacteria and fungi, which take years sometimes to kill the tree, but more likely that tree will be killed.
In addition to the chopping down of trees, the cutback of trees by utility companies continues to be an issue for the environment and those who promote and encourage the growth of trees on our island. Dr. John Webster laments the efforts of one such company. So concerned has he been about this practice that he has been seeking to share with the company his knowledge of the correct procedures and methods.
Their cutback of mahogany trees in particular is absolutely horrendous. If you move to the Worthing area, there is one tree there that is so badly hacked back that it is a disgrace. It should probably be taken down. It looks so awful. It really does not do a very good job on the cut back of trees like mahogany. I have actually offered to go and help their teams to understand how to prune the trees. I'm still waiting for a response.
One of the primary missions of this program is to encourage the Barbadians to plant more trees. and that will be the constant theme and refrain throughout the series. However, if the unfortunate does occur, that is, if a tree is either chopped down or has fallen, it does not have to be discarded and dumped on one of our landfills. Commercial benefits can be realized. Throughout the years, many Barbadians have used their creativity and talents to produce many functional and decorative pieces. We traveled to Whitehall Main Road in St. Michael and met up with one such individual who was very keen to share with us.
Here at Medford Craft World, we have put trees to a very, very, very special use. And here in Barbados, mahogany is the tree, the wood. And so I have developed a line of product that revolves around mahogany, which is a very Barbadian thing. And we have taken it to a new level where we ensure that a tree that falls, a tree that has to come down off a construction site or for whatever other reason, that it doesn't just quote unquote die there, but we can actually make it live on for years and years and years and probably centuries. That is the key to the line of product that we produce. One of the highlights, which I can proudly say I have discovered, invented, whichever word you want to choose or fits the bill, is working with the roots. Medford Mahogany has created this absolutely new product that never occurred in Barbados before me and my staff, where we go into the ground and we use the roots as well. So therefore, a tree is more than what is above ground. Typically, you cut down a tree and you go with it and you're happy and you're smiling, and that's the end of the story. In real terms, there are literally tons of wood left in the ground, in the roots, that is exquisite, fantastic quality wood that nobody ever thinks of. You've gone with your tree and that's the end of the story.
That is what used to be, not anymore. In recent times, at least one business in Barbados gradually developed an appreciation for the roots of the mahogany trees and has set about not only to unearth these roots literally, but carved and shaped them into beautiful works of art to be displayed permanently. But how does Medford Craft World go about doing this?
What we do is ensure that anytime a site is being cleared and there's a mahogany tree that's been pushed out of the ground to clear the site, we then utilize not only the tree, but we also utilize the root, the stump, the what was in the ground, the what would have been left there to rot, the what would end up in a dump or pushed somewhere in a gully. That is what we have now devised a way of turning into the most beautiful, distinctive, one only in the world art pieces. What you're seeing behind me here now is a root. Now this stump came from just down the road here in Brazets. A house was being built, so the person would have gotten permission to take down the tree. So they cut down the tree, but of course where the foundation was is where the stump was left back, so they had to take out the stump. We brought this stump in here maybe about 4.5 years ago. And you might wonder, 4.5 years ago, why is it still here? What's going down, right? But just going back to our theme about what becomes of trees, I think for me, as Reginald Medford, this is one of the greatest sense of satisfaction in terms of utilization of a local raw material, where a part of a tree, or what would have been junk, not even seen as raw material, has now become raw material and the basis for a very successful, distinctive art form product range that we can proudly, myself, we can proudly say we have developed from throwaway material, we can say is now recycled by us, to become very, very classy and distinctive individual pieces. And I can say to you with pride and confidence that what you're seeing here starting out as a dirty old crazy old room will end up in a palace, will end up in some fancy house somewhere in the world, and we have done pieces that have gone literally all over the world, and this is what becomes of a mahogany root, a mahogany tree in Barbados. It can end up being very, very much in place of pride in some great place all over the world.
That is fantastic. Just think about it. These majestic mahogany trees that have shaded us, provided us with oxygen, maintained our environment, are still enjoying that splendor and majesty even in death. And by making such great use of their roots, it is perhaps one of the greatest tributes that anyone, especially a craftsman, can give to a fallen mahogany tree.
Mahogany trees now, because of the line of product that between myself and my staff have developed, we are ensuring that whatever mahogany trees come down really end up as finely crafted finished product that will sit in somebody's office, sit in somebody's home, and be there for years and years and years. And that gives me a very great sense of satisfaction in terms that when the tree comes down, it doesn't go into the landfill, but it becomes an object of art and will remain there for years and years.
Fantastic. What a fitting tribute and a celebration to a fallen mahogany tree. Reggie Medford and his team making good use of the roots, not to mention the trunks and the branches. A fine example of pride in industry, creativity and imagination. His beautiful mahogany creations will be detailed later in the series. Until next week at the same time, I'm Sherwood McCaskie and I am gone in search of more trees.